Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Hope 2016 in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Hope 2016 opens with d3, a rather modest move on the first move. So black obviously has a wide range of choices in reply. I would normally just play d5, so I'm leaning towards that move right now. Yeah, let's play d5 and just take the center. If you like to play e4 as white, you might prefer e5 on move 1. So we've actually transposed to a Scandinavian declined, if you will. So the game could have just started e4, d5, d3, white declining the pawn. I looked at this briefly recently, and black can take on e4 and, of course, play the endgame. But it's also possible to play some offbeat stuff like e5 or knight f6, or even the move g6, which I find kind of interesting and I might go for. Yeah, you know what? Let's do this. This game is already taking a unusual path, so why not spice it up a bit and prepare to get the bishop to g7? It already has a nice diagonal to work with because white has not put any pawns on that diagonal other than the b2 pawn. So now c3. My guess is white's going to go for some setup involving knight d2, knight gf3, bishop e2, and queen c2. This is like a Hanham Philidor in reversed. And not a very ambitious setup for white, of course, but it is possible to play with this way. Just kind of forego any chance of a theoretical advantage and just get a structure you're comfortable with. Again, I could take on e4, but I think I'll just play bishop g7, complete my fianchetto. Hope everyone's having a good weekend. It's Friday afternoon as I'm recording this. White plays h3, another pawn move. So 4 pawn moves in the first 4 moves from white. Again, I'm considering taking on e4. I'm just trying to reassess the position after each move and decide if I want to take. This doesn't have to take a long time to reassess it, but it's something I want to think about. I could trade and then trade queens and then play knight f6 and see how white wants to respond to the attack on this pawn. That is somewhat attractive to me because I feel like h3 is a slight weakening of their king side. I could play knight f6, but white might play e5 and close the center if I do that. Whereas if I take and then trade queens and then play knight f6, I have a lead in development already. I like the look of that. Yeah, let's go for it. They can play queen a4 check if they want to recapture with the queen on e4, but needless to say, that would cost white a lot of time. Let me just check this player's stats. So they played 250 15-minute games. They've got a winning record, 131 wins, 99 losses, and we are headed for an endgame. I could also play knight d7, but let's continue with our plan. And just knight f6 now, hitting the pawn. Yeah, I thought white might play f3, but now I like the fact that they played h3 because I feel like their dark squares around their king side are very vulnerable. So, again, white's making a pawn move, but maybe I can exploit, for instance, the weakness of g3 in the future. You never know. For now, I'll probably just continue developing. Knight c6 looks reasonable. I don't think there's any reason to play c5 and try to get the pawn in front. There's not like a pawn on d4 I'm hoping to attack. So I think just knight c6, maybe with the plan of bishop e6, and proceeding from there is reasonable. You know what I might do is move this knight and then play for f5. I could envision that being possible, maybe trying to attack this pawn on e4. At some point very soon, white's going to have to catch up on development, so finally white plays a developing move, bishop c4. But maybe now I can play knight e5 and attack this bishop. If the bishop retreats to b3, I can get into d3 then if I want. Attacking the bishop, threatening knight f2. If knight takes b2 check, king c2 does trap the knight, however. There's other moves I could play here, like knight d7 if I want to bring the other knight to e5 and still go for that f5 plan. So I'm considering that. Could also play bishop d7, maybe look to castle queenside. I would like to disturb this bishop a little bit. I think that would be helpful, though. Yeah, let's do this move. If bishop b3, I think they will be a little concerned about the weakness of d3, so hence hope 2016 pulls the bishop back. Now, bishop e6 looks natural, looking to go castles queenside. So let's say I play bishop e6 and white rushes with the f-pawn. So f4, let's say I castle queenside, check. If king c2, probably just knight back to c6, I would think is good in that position. And then the e4 pawn is under attack. Maybe I can somehow play more aggressively. f4 is a little pesky. I mean, on bishop e6, f4, I guess I could just play knight c4. That's also fine. Yeah, let's develop. If bishop f4, I'm castling with check and simultaneously protecting my c-pawn. All right, white plays b3. I think they're trying to establish a record for the most amount of pawn moves in the first 10 moves. Over half their moves have been pawn moves. So b3. So if I castle with check, certainly they'll play king c2. I think b3 was played exclusively to control the c4 square. I don't see any other redeeming value for that move. So castle queenside check, king c2. Now I want to open the position because that's the way to make use of my development advantage. So let's do this. This is like a free move with check, and I fully expect white to put their king here. Now, if I could teleport my pawn to f5, this would be tremendous. You know what I can also consider here, though, is knight h5. And maybe that's the best way to try to threaten knight g3 and also look to play f5. If knight h5, what if they play f4? Am I at all concerned about that? I can still jump into g3, in that case, hitting the rook. That must be bad for white. I would have a very bad feeling about my position if I were on the white side of this, because I'm coming in on the dark squares. They would have to waste time moving their rook h2. It doesn't look right. So yeah, knight h5 seems like the way. And I don't think he can do much about the threat of knight g3. If I played something slower, then white might be allowed to catch up in development. And worst case scenario for me, push me back using their kingside pawns, for instance, like maybe a timely f4 and e5. So it's crucial that I create some threats right now and try to generate play based on having all my minor pieces out. White only has one minor piece out. They spent a lot of time on structural concerns, but that comes at the cost of time. Okay, so white plays just bishop e3, makes sense. Here I'm thinking of either f5 or knight g3. Both moves look interesting to me. I think they're getting ready to put the knight on d2. I could just grab the two bishops right now, and maybe I should. Knight g3, rook h2, and then either take on e2 directly or just wait. I'm kind of leaning towards waiting. Well, first of all, let's play this. Yeah, I don't think there's any reason to avoid this move. Force rook h2. And then I'm thinking f5. Attacking the pawn. Probably knight d2 will be played. I can play maybe rook hf8 after that. I don't feel a strong need to take this bishop right away because it can't really escape anyways. If it goes to d1, I actually have knight f1, which is rather amusing, forking the rook and the dark square bishop. And if I take on e2, that just gives white a reason to finally develop their kingside knight. So let's play this. I think knight d2 is almost forced here. I don't think white wants to take on f5 and allow me to play bishop takes f5 with check. Bishop f2, okay. So in this case, I can trade on e2 and then take on e4 and try to play against this weak pawn. Knight takes e2, knight takes e2, f takes e4, f takes e4. Maybe rook f8 is simple there. So rook h to f8, or maybe bishop h6, although bishop d4 is a bit pesky. I'll have to watch out for that. Maybe take and then play knight d3. Well, let's first capture. And I'll probably take e4 next, just to open the file. Yeah, let's do this. White instantly recaptures. Okay, so if I play knight d3, then I'm hitting the bishop. I'm also perhaps threatening stuff like knight b4 check and maybe bishop e5. Could be good. So knight d3, bishop d4. I don't really want to take their bishop then, and they are threatening to take on d3. So that's slightly pesky. Maybe just knight c6 right now. It feels a little lame, though. I would like to play something more aggressive, like knight d3. But knight d3, bishop d4, and I don't quite see how to react to that. So my bishop's under attack, and so is the knight. Knight c6, on the other hand, deals with the threat of white playing a knight to d4. And I'm thinking if knight c6, knight d2, knight b4 check is unpleasant, as if they take, their rook on a1 hangs. Yeah, so let's do this move. Withdrawing the knight, but I think there's some good points about this. I can still play rook hf8, and now I don't have to worry about bishop d4 with a pin on the knight on e5. My opponent has a large time advantage, but the position has been simplified. Okay, so here, knight b4 check seems to be possible. It must be a good move. Therefore, I think I will play it immediately. Let's not waste any time on it. And if white wants to avoid losing the exchange, they have to move their king. So king c1 or king b2. But then I don't even have to move my knight, because they still will not be able to take without losing the rook down here. I might move the knight into d3, but we'll see. I might play rook d3 and attack this dark square bishop. A piece coming to f4 or d4 is pesky, though, I'm not going to lie. White may try for that. Okay, so they play king b2. I'm thinking about rook d3 or rook hf8. I mean, he's well pinned up here. But knight d3 check doesn't seem to achieve anything after king c2, just repeating. I mean, I can go to d1, but what does that do? Not much, as far as I can tell. So if rook hf8, what if he plays bishop d4? I could take, knight takes, rook comes into f2 check. Ah, that must be good. Yeah, let's play this. Another rook on an open file. Rook d1 is another move I should have probably considered. Just penetrating to the back rank. But I think this is also good. White's under a lot of pressure. I think one false move and white could be busted here. I think they're already significantly worse. For me, it's the usual story. I'm down on time. That's my biggest problem. I do occasionally just get outplayed in these 15-minute games, but time is usually my biggest enemy. All right, knight d4, so I can withdraw my attacked bishop if I want. Just bishop back to g8, let's say. I could also take, but I don't really want to give up my dark square bishop for no reason. So let's bring this back. Play it safe. Now I'm envisioning a possible c5 move. Trying to further open up this long diagonal. If white takes on b4, I can take with the bishop or the rook on d4, with the rook looking more attractive to me. All right, a3, so white is clearly uncomfortable with the knight's presence here. Now maybe check and bring the knight to c5. Although if check, king c2, knight c5, knight d2 might cover a lot of stuff. I could also play knight c6, which is a interesting way to offer to trade and open this diagonal at the same time. That looks pretty good. Rather than knight d3 check. I could also play c5 and just try to barrel through. But somehow I like moving this knight. Yeah, let's move this knight. I'm not going to check on d3. I think white's king is poorly placed on b2, so I don't want to give it a free reason to go to c2. Now, if knight d2, I'm thinking rook d3 and attack the bishop on e3 and also that pawn. Check out these bishops lurking. g7, g8. Assassins just waiting to strike. Pressure on c3. Pressure on b3 as well. Rook d3 coming. If king c2, I think maybe rook f1 is a good reply, and this knight cannot move. Yeah, I'm going to bring this rook in. I'm letting this pawn on a7 hang. I think it would be pretty greedy for white to take it. Maybe they should take it. Oh, you know what I'm threatening here, by the way, is bishop e5. It's a cool threat, because I've just taken away the rook's flight square to h1, so this becomes possible. So if bishop takes a7, bishop e5, and this rook is lost. So for that reason, maybe they have to play g4. Okay, but it looks like they're falling for it. Here I could play bishop takes b3 check, king takes and take here, but bishop e5 is much easier. So yeah, let's go after this poorly placed rook. Not often you see rooks on h2 and a2. I wouldn't think that's a good sign for white normally. Okay, they can play g3. I don't know why I missed g3, but yes, that's forced. Okay, so here I can take a free pawn, or I can play bishop takes b3 check. Either of those moves. The free pawn is tempting, however. There's also rook here. Maybe one of the best moves of all. There's also bringing the other rook in to attack the knight. So if I bring that rook in, knight d2, rook check, king d3, take here, check. Yuck, that's a gross position for white. Let's just not lose on time. How about that? Okay, let's bring this in. I have 2:21. Time to hurry up. Rook b2 could be played, but he's going to go for this line. All right, so now we check. Oh, but this is just checkmate. All right, so that ended abruptly after king b2, bishop takes c3 checkmate. But yes, very bad for white anyways, because king d3, rook takes c3 check. You'd have to go to e2, and I would just move this rook. And with b3 and g3 being weak, and white having poor coordination, I think it's winning for black. But with the clock, it could have been a battle. So I like the way I developed my initiative. I think playing knight h5 to g3 and then playing for f5 was smart. I think for white, they would have done better to try to play knight d2 sooner. They delayed the development of their queen side, and in doing so, they took quite a few risks. I mean, white played this entire ending in risky fashion. I know the queens are off the board, but playing this many pawn moves is a cause for concern. So I did miscalculate at the end where I thought after bishop e5 I was just straight up winning the rook, but yes, there is g3 to actually free the rook along the second rank. Still very good for black, but Okay, let's go back and take a look. So d3, move 1. Against moves like this, don't overthink it. That's the main thing from the other side of the board. Like, don't assume that your opponent is playing some fancy system that you've never seen and that you're going to get crushed. Have some confidence. Tell yourself there's a reason why the best players in the world don't play 1d3. And just choose a setup that you're comfortable with. White is putting no pressure on the center, so you have the freedom to decide how you want to arrange your pieces. So for me, I just played d5. Like I said, an e4 player might be more comfortable playing this because after d5, there is a chance white could play d4, and we're in a d4, d5 opening in reverse. So here white played e4, and there's nothing wrong with going for the endgame straight away. But I just decided to make it more interesting and play g6. So had white taken here, I could take with the queen, and we have a Scandinavian where white has played d3 and black has played g6 very early on. Who that favors? I don't know. Maybe it's roughly equal. I don't know that either side gets a whole lot out of that. But white played c3 instead. Bishop g7. And here I decided to take on e4 and just play for the ending, because I think this h3 move does represent a weakness in the resulting queenless middle games. I'm using ending and queenless middle game kind of interchangeably here. I think queenless middle game would be the more accurate term for what happened. But you could say endgame. A lot of people just say endgame to refer to any circumstance where the queens get traded. But you can play a lot of middle games with the queens off that are just as rich as positions with the queen on and are far from endgames, in my opinion. So queenless middle game is the better term. So take, white took back. There is queen a4 check, followed by taking with the queen if white likes, but clearly that is not going to trouble black. I have a lead in development. So we swap off the queens. Maybe I should go immediately for f5. I played knight f6 here, but there's nothing stopping me from making this advance straight away. And if takes, I would assume bishop takes is good, because now I've taken away the c2 square, which white often likes to put their king on. I believe that was the reason for c3 on move 3. White wants to tuck the king here, and the pawn on c3 does a good job of guarding d4 and b4. So if I put a knight here and they have a king on c2, I can't check it easily. Can't check that white king. So yeah, f5 was possible. I just played knight f6, attacking the pawn. f3. And now knight c6. I didn't want to castle kingside yet because I wanted to leave open the option of castling long. So here, bishop c4, and I decided to go after that light square bishop straight away. White played the bishop back to e2. I was a little more concerned about bishop b3, because I felt like knight d3 was the principled reply to that, attacking the bishop and also threatening knight f2 check with a fork. But on bishop e3, I don't think I can go after this pawn because my knight gets trapped. All of its flight squares are covered. But I see now what the engine is recommending against bishop b3, and I do like that a lot. The engine says play b6. And with the bishop coming here, d3 is a very tender square. My knight and my bishop will be trained on that square, and also black is preparing castling long. So this looks bad for white. So bishop e2 instead, but maybe there's even something better for white. I don't know. Their position is already bordering on difficult. Knight a3 is the top move, just letting black take the bishop pair if I want, which I probably would. I probably would take and then play bishop e6 and be satisfied with my two bishops. So bishop e2, and I played bishop e6. Knight h5 already here is good as well. Don't think I consider that at this move. But yeah, similar to the game. So bishop e6, b3. Now we castle queenside with check. King c2. So white's played a lot of moves to try to cover where my minor pieces will jump. Like b3 was directed against knight c4 or bishop c4, I'm pretty sure. But they've taken a lot of liberties, and if the position becomes opened, you got to prefer black's chances with how developed I am. I'm fully developed, and white has a lot of question marks still. So knight h5. And I think this is the proper way to try to jump on the position. This is an idea, and the f5 push, creating contact with white's pawns that will make it easier for us to open lines. Bishop e3. I played the knight in. Rook h2, and now went for f5. Seems consistent. I see the computer also likes knight c6. This is an idea I went to later with knight b4 check hanging in the air. It also controls d4 well, so white can't put their bishop on that square, for instance. Yeah, this looks pretty good. But f5, and I really thought white should play knight d2 here, developing and reinforcing e4. I was probably going to take, but I wasn't completely sure how to proceed after that. Computer wants to double up the rooks on the d file. Maybe swing the rook over to c6 at some stage. Yeah, I think black is a lot better, but white needs to get their remaining pieces in the game, especially that knight. I think it's more important to get this knight in the game than it even is to get this one. Because white's king is on the queen side. They need to ensure that they don't get stuck in that wing. As you saw in the game, like their rook was never able to develop naturally. They had to put it on a2. It wasn't good. So instead they played bishop f2. And I took the bishop, took on e4. And here I think I debated a little bit because knight d3 is the move that is just crying out to be played. We're coming in with tempo, attacking the bishop. We're also opening the dark square bishop. But bishop d4 will be the reply, and suddenly this knight is cut off from the defense of the rook. And also this is under attack. I didn't see knight e1 leading anywhere. If white just makes some move. Even this is very good for black, but I don't see the position proceeding in a way that I like it. Rook hf8. I guess the idea there is if takes, there's rook f2, pinning the knight. Somehow my pieces are not combining as harmoniously as the game, let's say. So that's why I played knight c6, which also seems to be a good move. All right, the engine's coming around. It was saying rook hf8 and knight c6 were both good. Still likes rook hf8. So if I play that move with tempo on the bishop, what if bishop d4? Bishop d7 is very strong. Attempting to come to b5 or c6. That's a move I would have real difficulty finding. Bishop d7. Backwards bishop move, blocking my rook down the file. That's a computer move. I'm satisfied with knight c6. I like this move. So I think this is very pesky. And it also opens my dark square bishop. So if white played knight d2 now, then this is coming. And my knight will come into d3 next, or I'll have a threat on d2. Probably mostly knight d3 coming, though. Yeah, like if king c1 or b2, then we're checking and winning the bishop straight away. So white would have to play, if they're going to move their king b1 or king d1. Both of which look terrible. I mean, king b1 I can take on d2. That's winning. Yeah, king d1. I'm sure knight d3 is still good. Although there is bishop d4, isn't it? Still. So maybe rook hf8. Attacking the bishop again. Bishop d4. Ooh, and now the awesome move c5. That's a cool resource. Point being that if white takes on g7, rook f1 is checkmate. Pin knight on d2. Flight square covered by the black knight. So, yeah, knight d2, knight b4 check is still working out great for black. So white's firmly on their back foot, just trying to deal with all these threats. Bishop e3 didn't seem to help, but at least bishop e3 takes the bishop off the file, so rook hf8 is never coming with tempo. But still I get this move in. And the engine believes that white is objectively best off in taking the knight and letting me take on a1 and trying to struggle on here down the exchange. Yeah, this would be no fun for white, but I can see why this is preferable to the game continuation. If white manages to keep the position relatively closed, then at least they could negate my rooks for now. But this should be technically winning for black. Instead, king b2 was played. All right, and I played the best move, rook hf8. Because again, I didn't feel like I had to move this knight right away. White's in a pin. So I just brought another piece into the equation. And having the rook's influence down the file can never hurt. I mentioned that I probably should have looked at rook d1. I think this is another move that could be strong. But when you have a position that's very active, but there's no direct threats, it's often very attractive to bring in your last piece into the equation. So I wanted to make sure this rook was also participating. I had a game against this user KO Kings recently. I think it was my last standard video I posted, actually, or maybe second to last. And it was a similar situation there. I built up a great position out of the opening, also as black. And we reached a point in the game where it was clear that I was better, like a lot better. But I didn't see anything truly winning. Nothing that clearly won material or led to checkmate. So all I did was play some moves that just brought my remaining pieces into play, knowing that white was somewhat helpless anyways. And same concept here, rook hf8. And I think with the time situation, the clock becoming a bigger factor by the second, this is the right approach. I'm not going to regret having my rook on the f-file. And here white played knight d4. It's just hard to break out of this bind that they find themselves in. So knight d4, and I retreated the bishop to g8. I wanted to keep the bishop on this diagonal. And I was confident that my knight would be fine here, because again, if they take, then I have threats like this that I can execute. So rook takes d4. If bishop takes, check. We're going to get the rook in the corner if white moves their king. So let's say knight here, but then rook f2 check. King moves, take this. White can basically resign. Yeah, these two bishops are... even just the dark square bishop alone, it's like we hardly even need the light square bishop, but white's down material, and black is having all the fun here. Game over. So instead, white played a3, trying to boot the knight. Maybe rook h1 was a slightly better try. At least trying to cover that first rank. And then knight d3 check, king c2, knight f2 is good. Attacking the rook and also the pawn. Certainly if white were to take, this looks terrible for them. Knight d2 is walking straight into pins. Even simply doing this and taking, I'm sure, is really strong. Force white to defend, and we can gobble more pawns if we want. Technical win for black. So yeah, there's no solution for white at this point. But maybe rook h1 would have been a slightly better try. I see the engine is also recommending knight f3, maybe blocking the file that way. In this case, I can come in with this rook, though. As played, white went a3, and I brought the knight back here. I had a feeling when I played this move that it wasn't best, but I had spent some time already, and it looked all right, trying to knock out this knight on d4. I just didn't see where knight d3 check, king c2 was leading. Let's see what the computer thinks. Check again. So if they cross to the d file, bishop e5, attacking the rook. And I guess the plan there is if rook h1, we take on g2. Yeah, I didn't see this device, knight e1 followed by bishop e5 in particular. But that is nifty. It's a little abstract. Kind of an unusual minor piece attack. But knight c6, on the other hand, I'm hitting this knight multiple times. So white took. And I figured bishop takes a7 would just be too dangerous for white here. Maybe they should try it, because at least they get a pawn for their suffering. But I figured that moves like rook f1 or rook d3 would put white under tremendous pressure. The engine thinks that this is the best move. g4. Yeah, just tough to do much, because if knight d2, then c3 falls. Yeah, so instead, white played king c2, getting out of the pin on the long diagonal. But I came in with the rook f1, rook a2. So now bishop e5 is coming. I thought white was going to play a g-pawn push for that reason, like maybe g4. And I'm sure black has good ways of treating this. Possibly even the slow move that the computer is advocating, king b7, just defending the pawn. Recognizing that The onus is not on black to do anything here. This knight is still pinned. They can't play knight d2. So we can play a move to secure even this lowly pawn. And white is still stuck. Yeah, e4 will be weak. Maybe I'll play rook f3 to attack the bishop and also h3. Maybe I'll just continue with rook d to d1. Yeah, something like this. Build the threats. Then bishop takes b3 check becomes a threat, followed by rook takes b1. Even bishop takes c3 might be a threat. So white played rook a2. And here I was very happy to play bishop e5. I thought the game was going to be over. But I missed that white could play g3. Another move here to consider is rook e1, attacking the bishop. And then going after the e-pawn, or checking here, actually. Yeah, if they take on a7, I can just check and I'll pick up the rook over here. So that's crushing. Yeah, rook e1 looks nice. Now g3. Now, it would have been a real shame if I had spent so much time just finding the best way to win a one position that I ended up losing on the clock. So I'm kind of kicking myself for having spent so much time on my next move. I probably spent maybe 45 seconds. Let's see. Yeah, almost a minute. I had 3:17 and I was down to 2:21. So that's too long. I played a good move, but I should have decided a little quicker. 3 minutes left on my clock. It's nothing to mess around with. That's not a lot of time. I was considering options like taking here check, deflecting the king, and then going after the knight. Also simply bishop takes g3. But I thought they would play rook g2 and then maybe go after the a7 pawn or something. So just these mini calculations cost me some time. Rook d to d1, knight d2. Maybe rook b2 is more tenacious, simply defending the knight. And here I probably would have opted for bishop takes g3, or maybe king b7 to defend the pawn. But white played knight d2, I got to check, and here they have to play king d3, no question, because the game continuation was made on the next move. So if king d3 is played, rook takes c3 check, king here, and then I could just pull the rook somewhere. Yeah, maybe rook all the way back. g3 is still hanging. They could technically still go after this pawn, but yeah, even c5 is possible, and this bishop may not escape. King b7 is threatened. My pawn is now defended by the rook. All right, so if we try to pinpoint where white actually lost this game, I think it was probably when they passed up knight d2. I think after bishop f2, black should win. Maybe I'm being a little presumptuous, but black has everything going for them. A lead in development, the bishop pair, coordination. If knight d2 had been played, it's apparently still bad, but I feel like white has a fighting chance at that point. Yeah, you see it's still -1 or 1.5, something in that range, but they got to get their pieces out. They've spent way too long delaying the development of their knights, and all these pawn moves, they come to tell. They add up. And I was able to infiltrate some key squares, like I took advantage of the b4 square, took advantage of the g3 square. Not how you want to play with the white pieces. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any feedback in the comments. And have a good weekend, everyone. I'll be back soon with another video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.